Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to just make mention, like I said in the chat earlier, we are having a prompt 9:15 a.m. start. So if you know of any of your peers that should be in this call and haven't hopped on yet, please do feel compelled to send them the invite via text or however you communicate with them. Otherwise, like I said, your presence is much appreciated. This is a great opportunity for you to engage with a local representative that serves the 85th district in the Bronx. And I won't be talking too much, but Miss Loren and Miss Stacy will be moderating. And if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and there will be time, I'm sure, for a Q&A at the end where you can come off mute if you feel comfortable. So I pass the baton to my colleagues.
Yes, as this was shared, we will be starting at promptly 9:15, so another minute, give or take. But again, like was shared, if you have other participants or group members that should be on this call, please share out the link information with them, and we will be getting started very shortly. But thank you all for coming, and a good morning as well.
So it is 9:15. We're going to start on time today. Good morning. Most of you on this call may know me. My name is Lauren Sanchez. Today we have Assembly Member Kenny Burgos to share his experience, how he got to the position where he is. And if you guys have any questions, like Liz and Stacy both said, please feel free to raise your hand, drop it in the chat. Sorry, I'm just admitting someone in. Drop it in the chat, or feel free to just unmute yourselves. And at this time, Mr. Burgos, if you would like, please introduce yourself to our participants.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Liz and Stacy, and thank you everyone for joining in today. I'm sure there are many things you'd want to do on your Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., but I really appreciate you all taking the time to come out and hop on the Zoom. If you hear a little bit of noise in the background, that's my dog. She's drinking some water, and her collar kind of bangs on the bowl, so pardon that. But again, so thank you for the introduction and opportunity to speak with you all today. So to introduce myself again, my name is Assembly Member Kenny Burgos, and I represent the 85th Assembly District in the Bronx, which includes the neighborhoods of Soundview, Classen Point, and Harding Park. And I'm sure you know, public service is a deep passion of mine and an experience that I really love to share with others, especially young people throughout the Bronx, especially. Some background about myself, I'm a second generation Bronxite. Growing up in the Bronx, I personally saw the constant realities that, my constituents face every day, from income inequality to deep inequities just in my community. In fact, I grew up in a split family home in, different Bronx neighborhoods. And I noticed just how different a zip code can really have an impact just on one person's life. So my interest in public service was pretty much sparked as a student when I was going to school in SUNY Albany, and I graduated with an economics degree. It was during my time in Albany where I really saw firsthand the role of our state government. So when I graduated, I returned to the Bronx and I worked as a staffer for two of my home New York City council members, as a deputy chief of staff and as a budget director. As a city council aide, I worked with different government agencies, nonprofit organizations, small businesses, to help solve some of the racial and economic disparities, as well as build relationships and focus on improving, local schools, libraries, and playgrounds just in my neighborhood. After that, I decided to run for office, just because of my own personal experience with the disparities and injustice in the Bronx and the socioeconomic issues that have really been plaguing this borough for a long, long time. It inspired me to serve the people of my district and to hopefully to build an economy that works for everyone, regardless of their background. I wanted to share my background because young people like myself, are the next generation of future leaders, and it's crucial to become involved. There are issues that will affect millennials and Gen Zers for future decades, from healthcare, education, student debt, income inequality, gun violence prevention, criminal justice reform, civil rights and liberties, and obviously our current climate crisis. There are many ways to become involved and advocate for these essential issues. You can join a political club or a grassroots organization. You can find a campaign to volunteer. And once you turn 18, vote. And I will say it again, please, when you turn 18, vote. It's your most powerful voice, and I cannot stress the importance of voting in every single election, whether it's local or state or federal. If you ever watched the TV show The West Wing, you may have heard the following line: decisions are made by those who show up. This means that if you have a vision and want certain policies enacted, such as criminal justice reform and climate action, then you have to show up at the polls and you have to vote for the candidate who's going to share those views with you. And if you're not eligible to vote yet, that's fine, but you can still make a great impact in your community. For example, if you know someone who is neither knowledgeable or engaged in our political system, educate them and stress the importance of being involved. Most importantly, if the person you're speaking with has no plan to vote, sit down with them, figure out a way to help them get to the polls. Remind them that the decisions they're making will affect not just them, but your generation and generations for future decades. Finally, being politically involved has a great networking opportunity, especially if you want to work in politics and or run for office. It has a great feeling to have an opportunity to achieve something for your community. Public service does not just benefit yourself, but your friends, your family, and future generations. So seeing young people involved is always inspiring, and I'm grateful that you're taking interest in our political system and finding ways to make our communities better and safer. My advice to you is to keep working hard, and you will see the benefits of being involved in public service. Thank you again, and I look forward to any questions you may have. And apologize for the dog.
No, thank you so much for joining us, Assembly Member Burgos. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to our participants here. I would love to hear a little bit more about your particular process and decision to run for the New York State Assembly and how that process was in terms of the campaign and also getting into office.
Yeah, so when I decided to run for my seat, it had become an open seat by the previous member. And, sometimes, especially, I think, young people from millennial and Gen Zers, we can sometimes feel like we may not have the right experience or amount of time put in to hold certain positions or hold certain titles. So it was a long process for me to really decide to run. But I ultimately came to the decision that, this is a body in New York State Legislature where before I came into office, the average age here was 62 years old. And it's not to slight anyone on age, there's a lot of wisdom that comes with age, but the reality is these are people deciding what's going on in our state, and they're coming from an entirely different viewpoint, right? They're born in an entirely different decade, and their experience growing up in New York is just not the same as, someone is on this call, right? If you're 18, if you're 25, you're 30, you have an entirely different experience growing up in New York, no matter the borough. And I thought it was vital to have that voice in our government. So I said, I'm throwing my hat in the ring. And I launched my campaign in February of 2020, which many of you will know is a pretty notable time of 2020, pretty much when we started the pandemic, right? So lockdowns began. So my campaign went completely virtual within a month. Whereas a campaign is supposed to be, out in the streets, shaking hands, talking to families, I couldn't do any of that. So I really had to kind of pivot and do my campaign as no one has ever done. I mean, we had to go fully virtual. So it was a learning curve. We made a lot of mistakes, but we learned from them. But ultimately, thankfully, won the campaign. And I sit here before you about 9 months into my position.
And we thank you for that. Again, as a Bronx native, and I'm assuming almost everyone on this call is a Bronx native, we've lived together through the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I would like to, ask the question regarding what that daily task looked like during COVID, because you did say that it's usually shaking hands and doing things like that. And now you have to sanitize, you have to do everything remotely. What did that daily life look like for you during the pandemic?
So initially, I was on complete lockdown like everybody else. So I pretty much was spending most of my hours right behind this computer screen, sending emails, Facebook, just trying to get pretty much the message out of my campaign as best as I could through a digital platform. Thankfully, everyone else is home as well. So I think they were also on their devices. But we made phone calls, we phone banked, we text banked. And then when we got to a point where we understood what was going on a little bit more and people were able to go outside, we had masks, and at the time we were wearing gloves. I had a lot of just food distribution because, food insecurity was a huge, huge issue and continues to be in my district. And at the height of the pandemic, people were out of work. There was no stimulus checks. Unemployment had not been expanded at that point. So families are really hurting. So I really took my campaign to kind of do the work that I still do today, right? So it's really proving to my community that the work that I'm doing now, whether like it or not, before or not, I'll continue to do. And I hope and I think that resonated with them. I was out in the streets as best as I could with my team, and again, campaigning, giving out flyers, sending the message, at the same time trying to bring as many resources I could really to my community, because it was really, really a big need. Did I answer all the questions? Did I miss a part?
Sorry, you answered all the questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat. If you could please share the New York City schools that you attended prior to SUNY Albany.
Yeah. So growing up, I went to a ton of schools. I first started off, my parents had me in Catholic school in 207th Street in Inwood. And then from there, I went to public school. I went to PS14. And then from there, I went to St. Raymond's for 6th grade. And from there, I went to IS 192 in the Throgs Neck area. And then for high school, I went to the Bronx High School of Science. So I attended pretty much public schools. I attended Catholic schools, and then ultimately went on to SUNY Albany for my undergraduate degree. And currently considering it and looking towards getting it either my master's or my JD.
Awesome, thank you. Like you mentioned, you did go to an array of schools. How has your specific experience going to public schools, in general, your education, how has that really impacted your decision to become an assembly member?
Obviously, public education. Can you guys hear that? Let me try to take that away from her. 1 second.
While we do wait for the assembly member to come back, please feel free to ask any other questions in the chat in the meantime.
Sorry, one of the loudest toys she owns. But obviously, listen, as a state, as a government, we have a duty to provide a sound public education system, right? And being someone that has experienced public education and the quote unquote Catholic, I guess, private education, as my mother thought would be best, it again showed me the disparities, pretty much a running theme in my life. You see the differences afforded to different neighborhoods, to children of different backgrounds, to just, all in the same city. We're talking about 5 miles away, a few blocks away, and kids are receiving an entirely different experience growing up in this city and in this state. And this will affect everything. This affects what they become. This affects who they are. So when I ran for office, it inspired me to make sure that there is an actual an equitable system across the board, where if you're born in the Bronx, if you're born in the South Bronx, whether you're born in Riverdale or Morrisania or Co-op City or Throgs Neck or Soundview, you should have and be afforded the exact same opportunities as all your peers. Your education system should be exactly the same, especially as your counterparts in Manhattan. When I went to Bronx Science, I had an eye-opening experience because, believe it or not, most of the kids going to Bronx High School of Science don't come from the Bronx. I was one of a few. Most of those kids come in from Queens or Manhattan, and they're bussed in, and they have, they've had exceptional educations when I speak to them in middle school and elementary school, tutoring. The involvement of their parents held positions that I didn't even know existed. My mom continues to work for Verizon. She's a customer service rep for 30 years. My dad does telecom work. So to me, to hear of students whose parents were writers or ambassadors, it was completely unfathomable to me. It was just something I was never exposed to. And you learn how these differences in life just completely reshape how someone reacts to the world, how they engage with the world, and what they ultimately will become. So running for office, I just feel we have so much power in the government to really change that. And again, really bring a way, way more equitable system, especially for the kids right here in the Bronx.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just want everyone on the call to know that, again, you are from the Bronx. We all share kind of similar backgrounds. So anything that you've done, it's possible for them as well. Our next question, I would have to ask, what resources are available to our young people, just in general, if they want to get into civic engagement, if they want to go into the process or start the political field as of now? What resources do they have available to them?
I'm going to answer that right now. I want to address Raiden Davison's comment on the chat. It said millennials are like 40. They can no longer be considered young. Well, Raiden, I'm 27. I'm still a millennial. I'm on the later end millennials. So we still have some young millennials, but it's a wide range. But to answer your question, Lauren, I mean, there's so many resources, and the reality is no one is better positioned right now to be engaged politically, to have a huge impact in what our government does than young people. And Raiden, you can consider young people Gen Zers if you want to consider them millennials. But at the end of the day, no one is more technologically advanced. No one is more in tune with social media than young people. And I don't care who tells you Twitter is not real life or TikTok, whatever it is, that all has a huge, huge impact. And we've seen it time and time again. So like I said earlier, whether you can vote, whether you can't vote yet, you can still shape these conversations. Social media is the sharing of ideas. It spreads far and wide, faster than we've ever seen before. And when those ideas get traction, politicians pay attention. When the masses want to see change, when they say, this is what I want to see in my community, when I want to see student debt canceled, when I want to see a climate action plan given, when I want to see police reform, then politicians have absolutely no choice but to react. And not react because we are here as voices of the people. Now, granted, you'll have, every politician is different, but at the end of the day, he or she was voted in by the people of his or her community and are responsible to voice their opinions and what they want to see. So young people can use social media. Like I said, you can engage with a political club. It doesn't even have to be a political club. It can be a local organization that you work with. It could be an organization working like I have, the Bronx River Alliance, not too far in my district, that works on the river, works making a greener space, makes the environment much healthier for animals to come back in the only freshwater river in New York City that has been so polluted that animals just weren't there before. But that kind of action can grow so big that you can, again, become engaged by showing the work you do here on something as small as a river and say to your local politician, hey, I want to see some more funding for groups like this. Or, hey, I think there should be a law in place to prevent X, Y, and Z from happening. So there's just so many different routes depending on the issue that's important to you, depending on what's affecting you directly. And really, there's no route that's wrong. And it can always be as simple as just reaching out to your local elected, shooting an email, calling their office. For me, I get people that just DM me on Instagram. Like it's just I try to be as accessible as possible, and I think my colleagues as well. But some people feel like their government is too far and apart from them. Sometimes we grow up with the conception that the government is over here and I'm over there. Whereas the government is right here working with you on the ground, but you have to kind of make that first leap too to make the connection. You have to make sure that we hear your voice, right? I can't know what's going on everywhere, even in my own district. But if you live in a certain neighborhood and say, hey, this is a problem going on right on my block, then it comes to my attention. Otherwise, how would I know? So there's no wrong way to get involved. There's tons of networks that you can start your own. It can be a group of 3 friends and you guys want to, work on this issue. I mean, make an action plan, and I'd be happy to help pass that if you have more questions.
Yeah, thank you. And on that point, like I know you were mentioning a lot about working together with the community, talking with members of your community. So how can we help better help engage the community in that larger conversation? How can we start the conversation? How can we keep it going?
It's hard. I mean, the reality is, we have lives, right? People have to work sometimes 1, 2, even 3 jobs. People work to put food on the table, pay your bills. We have life problems. We have problems with friends. We have issues in the family. I mean, it has no shortage of issues that we have to deal with personally. So it's sometimes very difficult for an individual to say, I'm going to get involved with politics now, or I'm going to engage my community when you have so much just on your plate as an individual. So the first thing, I think, it comes to education, right? Sometimes we don't realize that we're all collectively going through a lot of these same issues. And as opposed to taking it on your own, you can work with that network, work with your community, work with your friends and family to be a team and again, work on these issues as a whole. Because believe it or not, I know most people like to say, I don't get involved in politics or I don't like to educate myself on that, but it affects everyone. I stress to everyone I speak to, no matter whether you choose to engage or not, politics affects you every day. And maybe not politics, but government. It affects every aspect of your life, whether directly or indirectly. So you're better off being involved, because why would you want someone else making the decisions for you? Why would you want someone else's input deciding how your neighborhood, your city, your state, or your borough is operated, and not to maybe your benefit or your neighborhood's benefit? So you have to organize with the most local of people, your neighbors, your block, I mean, your classmates, your family. Just organize them, educate them. And what I mean is just say, listen, these are the issues we have. This is how we can solve it. This is the plan we have to take. And I'm not saying this is going to be your full-time job. I'm not saying you're going to be an activist 9 to 5 every day, but a small effort goes such a long way. You know, I represent 130,000 people in my district. In my one assembly district, there's 150 assembly members throughout the state of New York. And we each represent more or less 130,000 people. I was elected in the Democratic primary last year by just under 7,000 people. Now, you can look at that a few ways, right? But what I see is that, unfortunately, 7,000 people decided who would represent them in the New York State government. And they made that decision for 123,000 other people who chose not to get involved. Now, I like to hope and believe that I'm the best candidate and I'm doing the work and I'm here to work every day for them. But the reality is, it's a very insular kind of operation if no one is involved. You're letting 7,000 people decide for you who represents you, while 123,000 people sit on the sidelines. So I tell people, it's not about being a PhD student in political science. You don't have to be well-versed on every single issue. You can be a one-issue voter. You can say the trash on my block never gets picked up. It's always dirty. I need a candidate who's going to fix that. And you can vote just on that issue, but be involved and vote, because it's going to shape the conversation. It's going to make your politicians work, and it's going to make your neighborhood much better. So I will leave it on that. Just take part in the process, as little or as much as you can.
Thank you. Our next question: what personal quality has helped you most succeed?
I would say adaptability. I pride myself on being able to operate in any room you throw me in, and I think it's a crucial skill for anyone to have. You have to be adaptable, especially in New York, right? We're the cultural melting pot of the entire world. We have every single race, religion, creed, background, country, language, all right here in a nice tight 25 square miles or so. So being adaptable has been huge to me. Again, right? Everyone I think can relate here, whether you were born in the Bronx or live in the Bronx. There's a certain conception of the Bronx. I mean, you speak to people from other states or other countries, and they have this vision of what our borough is, and it's usually not as beautiful as it really, really is. So you can always surprise people on that front, right? I pride myself on being adaptable, where I can go, walk on my street and I can be in jeans and some sneakers and a t-shirt and a Yankee fitted, and I blend in. Like, people won't even recognize or think I'm an elected official, but I can also throw on a suit and tie. And even with my hair is dyed, and it just confuses people. But being adaptable, I think, allows you to just be in almost any room and really thrive in that room. Learning how to, be culturally sensitive, learning to speak with people of all different backgrounds, and always but regardless of that, always bringing your authentic self. So that's a fine, needle to thread, but you can be adaptable and still always be you. And I think if you can maintain those qualities, you will always go so far in life, because people respect, someone who's genuine, someone who's always themselves and brings their entire selves to the table, no matter what that table is.
Thank you for that, Mr. Burgos. I actually had a question as you were remarking that, and it was kind of great that we segued this way. I was going to say, it's what a great quality to be adaptable. And during this pandemic, obviously, we have had to be in all different ways. clearly, the political sphere is divided in some respects. So when you enter a room, right, when you enter a room with people that have different backgrounds and ideals and ideologies, how can we teach our young people to be able to collaborate effectively between their ideas and an opposing party's ideas, and to make it fruitful and not a negative?
That's huge. I mean, you have unfortunately 30, 40-year politicians that have not learned that skill yet, but it really is crucial. Unfortunately, we've come off of a 4-year presidency that has spewed nothing but divisiveness and hateful rhetoric, and that transcends to our entire country. So I work every day. I mean, I have a lot of friends and colleagues and people who we try to kind of remove that toxic behavior. But at the end of the day, you're never going to agree with anyone on everything. And even me being a Democrat, we have a Democratic Party. We have 107 Democrats in the state assembly. And when we work on a law, when we work on a policy, when we work on an objective, 107 people are just never going to agree. You could be from the same party, but it's just not going to happen. Someone in Putnam County is not going to think the same way to do things is the way of someone in the Bronx. But the first and foremost, the most important thing is to never dismiss someone's ideas. You never know what angle someone's coming from. You never know someone's experience. So you cannot always take your personal opinion and your personal idea as 100% fact and the only possible path. You never dismiss someone's ideas. You listen to them. You don't listen just to respond, right? You have to learn to listen to people and really hear what they're saying and what their perspective is. And then you can comment on it, give your analysis of it, say why you think it's right or why it's wrong, and then propose your own idea. And if the person is able to kind of reciprocate that, and you can multiply this by multiple people, then that's where we can come to some sort of commonality and find out the best pathway forward. And that's really what democracy is. That's really what this country was founded on, was to share all ideas, to come from all different perspectives. And we're going to find the most meaningful and most significant policy that's going to affect the majority of people. Will everyone leave the room happy? Absolutely not. But that is democracy. That's why, unfortunately, sometimes government works slow and steady. People in the media, sometimes people in the outside world will complain and say, government or politicians never work for me. And unfortunately, it's just never going to be 100%. I mean, I go into rooms sometimes with intention, what I want to see done, and I don't leave there happy. And I have to go back to my district and my constituents and say, listen, this is the best deal we can come with. This is going to help X, Y, and Z. And next year, we're going to go for even more. But this is not a monarchy. I'm not a king. I cannot decide, nor can even the president of the United States just decide with the stroke of a pen what we're going to do as a country or as a state or as a city. We have to work together. And it's not only just with politicians. I have to work with advocates. I have to work with the people who vote, the people who live in my district. So this is really the culminating of so many ideas and trying to find that happy medium that will really work for, if not everyone, majority of people. But again, just you cannot be dismissive of people because everyone just comes from an entirely different perspective.
Thank you for that. We do have a question in the chat from Mahawa. How do you feel about police brutality?
How do I feel about police brutality? I mean, I think I feel as pretty much all New Yorkers do. It's something we never want to see done. It's something that, is not the role of police. It's something that unfortunately I have friends and family that have experienced. I went to school during the Bloomberg eras when the famous stop and frisk policy was enacted, and I was stopped and frisked multiple times. So I saw firsthand, again, how someone's decision can affect hundreds of thousands and millions of New Yorkers. So police brutality is not something we want to see going forward. I'm a true believer that there is room for significant police reform. As anything, I tell everyone, every single thing we see in our daily lives, from police to schools to the way your trash is picked up, was decided by somebody, and somebody else can decide to change that. Nothing is off the table. Nothing lacks the room for improvement. So we're going to work as a state and as a city to combat police brutality, to combat the culture of policing, and to really reimagine what policing can look like in the 21st century, because it really is time. And policing has not seen a major kind of, I don't want to say update or improvement, but some real significant change in some decades now. So I think the conversation, like you bringing it up right now is important because this is where we share ideas. This is where people share their experiences. And this is where we can come to a much better system that hopefully works for everyone in the city.
We do have a follow-up to that question in the chat,
Yep.
asking what actions have been put in place.
So last year, actually, the state legislature repealed a law known as 50A. What 50A was basically a law someone decided 20 some odd years ago that police misconduct records were not for the public eye. Now, keep in mind, police, like myself, are a public payroll. We are paid by the tax dollars of New York City and New York State. All of you on this call have or will pay taxes someday, and that pays me and it pays police. So we are subject to public scrutiny. Now, 50A unfortunately shielded officers from that kind of scrutiny. Officers could unfortunately commit, some sort of brutality, be reported, even have, some sort of disciplinary action taken by their commanding officer, and we would not know about this. So as a state, we repealed that law that shielded these officers that kind of immunity. So now the public is able to see firsthand who are the officers who are committing these acts. How are they being disciplined? And what do we want to see happen? Because too often there was a culture in policing where they just protected their own. Unfortunately, they would, commit these sort of acts, get a slap on the wrist and continue to just work maybe in another precinct and would continue to have this kind of behavior. So now with everything out in the open, we have names, we have badge numbers, we have salaries, we have all the information that we can now scrutinize those who are in charge. We can scrutinize commissioners and mayors and elected officials like myself and say, I don't want to see this officer on the job because this officer has committed X, Y, and Z. Now, is there much more room for police improvement? Absolutely. But like I said, I'm not a king. I can't go to the legislature tomorrow and say, this is everything we're going to change to policing. I can bring those ideas, I discuss it with my colleagues, and we work through it. So there's a lot more to be done. We have to talk about qualified immunity. We have to talk about residency, if you ask me. We have to talk about the police budget. And it's all these things that we have to work on in order to really improve policing in New York City, because it's not just New York City. This is a United States of America problem, but policing is a local issue. So this is why I tell people local elections matter so much. President Joe Biden does not decide what happens with the NYPD. Governor Andrew Cuomo does not decide what happens with the NYPD. Mayor de Blasio is the person who has almost unilateral power over policing in our city. And this can vary across the board in different countries, in different states, because every government is kind of structured slightly different. But the main theme here is that police are a local organization run by local elected officials, run by the elected officials that you all should be voting in. So if you want to see police reform, ask your local electeds, what are their plans? What are their views on policing now? What do they want to see changed? Because they have almost unilateral power in changing how policing is done in your neighborhood.
Thank you, Assemblyman Burgos, for that response. And thank you, Mahawa, for participating and asking a very, very good question. Our next question for you, what contribution do you feel you have made that you're most proud of at this time?
So as a freshman assemblyman, it's really hard sometimes to get some really big bills passed. But I've been able to co-sponsor some huge ones, and I've been super proud of them this year. The government's done a lot this year, at least in the state level. So like I said, I was a sponsor of the repeal of 50A. So I was proud to be, part of that bill. I was a sponsor of the Halt Solitary Confinement Act, which was a bill that put an end to solitary confinement in prisons and jails in New York for really vulnerable populations. It didn't wipe away solitary confinement as a whole, as I would like to see, but we did really reduce the risk of solitary confinement for individuals. Like if you heard the story of Khalif Browder, who unfortunately took his life because of solitary confinement. So I think that will be huge and impactful for years to come. I was also very proud to sponsor the legalization of marijuana this year. That was something done on a local state level. Again, this is where your local electeds matter. Because, and again, it's not really to legalize marijuana. I didn't vote on it for to bring a recreational use, right? I mean, that's part of it. But my biggest impact in voting for that bill was the incarceration amounts, that the incarceration levels that we had in New York for marijuana. New York City was the marijuana arrest capital of the country, where Black men were arrested at 8 times the rate of their white counterparts for marijuana charges. Yet we know, statistically proven, that people smoke marijuana on a pretty much similar level, white, Black, or Hispanic. So making marijuana legal really is going to help to remove the decades of the war on drugs, of mass incarceration in this country and in this state. So those are 3, I think really, really big bills that we passed this session. And I'm looking forward to the next coming years to pass even way more impactful change. And I sponsored, I'll add in my bill, that my own personal bill that was signed into law not too long ago by the governor, was to add telemarketing through text messages as part of the telemarketing law. So previously, telemarketing was outlawed in our state through phone calls. So you remember you can put your phone on do not call list, but a big loophole that a lot of these telemarketers bypassed, especially during the pandemic, was to text you. I'm sure everyone here got some sort of spam texts throughout the many months that have passed. So now, in the next coming months, you'll be able to put your phone on a do not text list along with do not call list and avoid those kind of telemarketing. So again, we can talk as big as police brutality, sometimes just, a little day-to-day nuisance that your government can help fix.
Great, thank you. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like what your day-to-day or daily, like, I should say, like, responsibilities or duties are. Like, what does a typical day like look for you?
No day is the same. That's one reason I love this job. After this call, I have to go down to City Hall for a press conference. Then I may have, some meetings, and I may have some emails or phone calls to make. Every day can change. It really depends what's the public discourse. It depends what we're handling at the time. I have community events on weekends where we do book bag giveaways for back to school. And then our job, at least in the state legislature, we go into what's called a legislative session 6 months out the year. So from January to June, we're traveling back and forth to Albany, our state capital, to actually, pass these bills, pass these laws, and trying to adjust New York as every day and every month changes. Our world changes, and we try to adjust to make it work better. So my days can really, really vary. Sometimes they can start early in the morning and late at night. Sometimes I may not, have much on a Friday, but I'm working Saturday and Sunday. So it's not a typical 9 to 5. But I'm blessed and honored to be in a position because, I get to speak with people from my neighborhood on the ground every day. And I also get to impact, really meaningful change at the state capitol, and especially in a state like New York, where we lead the charge. So, many bills that we pass sometimes get passed now in other states. And sometimes they get passed up to a federal level, because then you have Congress members or the president to say, you know what, that's a meaningful law that I would love to see for the entire country. Let's work on getting that passed. So no day is the same, and it's an exciting job and one I'm really honored and privileged to be. I'll also really quickly address Mahawa. I'm not a senator, but I think it's always important to kind of, clarify how our state government is structured. So I'm an assemblyman. Like I said earlier, there's 150 assembly members throughout the entire state of New York, from Buffalo all the way down to Long Island. Then you have the Senate, which is our legislative counterpart, and there are 63 state senators throughout the state of New York. And then you have one governor. So similar to the 3 branches of government in the federal level, where you have the Congress, you have the Senate, and you have the president, here in New York, we have the governor, the assembly, and the Senate. So that's kind of how our government structure is. So the Senate and the Assembly pass bills, and then the governor can then sign or veto them to make them law.
Thank you for getting back to her. We also have a question in the chat from one of the instructors. It says, "Good morning. My cohort is working on a project geared toward the topic of gun violence. What are some prevention measures you have or will sign, and how will the Bronx specifically be affected by gun violence?"
Gun violence is such a tough issue. Unfortunately, I get emails all the time from my precinct, letting me know there was a shooting on this corner, 2 victims, and it's heartbreaking to hear every time, especially most of the time it's men under 25 years old. And it's an issue not uncommon. It's not unique to just New York City. It's an issue plaguing the entire country right now, and there's a lot of factors into gun violence. I'm a big believer that gun violence and crime itself is really just a product of poverty. You know, when you have poverty, when people don't have jobs, when people are food insecure, when people don't have stable housing, unfortunately, that creates an environment that breeds crime. So I think to cure gun violence in the long run, we have to tackle poverty, right? We have to tackle our housing crisis. We have 65,000 homeless people in New York City on any given night. We have to tackle food insecurity. We're in the richest city, in the richest state, in the richest nation in the whole world, and there are people that go hungry. There are children that go hungry. And I think when we tackle these issues on a larger landscape, we will then attack gun violence. But in the short term, I mean, this is a discussion we've been having with the governor, we've been having with my colleagues, and actually we had a roundtable with the governor about 2 weeks ago, and he's injecting about $15 million into just the Bronx, into very hyper-local zip codes, many that are in my district, to really target why this gun violence is occurring, to really target the young, it's young men most of the time, right? The young men that are involved in these gun shootings. So that's going to look like violence interrupter programs where we have individuals from these neighborhoods who go there and have meaningful mediation, like really on the ground, because the people there are going to respect someone who grew up in that neighborhood, who knows those experiences, but maybe has come out of that life and chosen a better path, and can speak to those young kids and tell them this retaliation, this shooting is not the way. So that's a violence interrupter. That's one way. We're going to invest in direct job pipelines. So we have about 874 jobs, I think the governor has lined up to bring into these hyper-local areas to get direct job pipelines to meaningful work. I mean, we're talking about like carpenters, union work, not minimum wage jobs. And I think when you bring in, jobs, violence interrupters, and you stop the flow of guns, I think we can meaningfully change the gun violence in our city. Because the reality is, we don't really sell guns in New York City. You can't really go around the block or down Manhattan and go to a local gun shop and buy a gun. So we know these guns are coming in through other states that have a little bit more lax gun laws. I'm not gonna, point them out, but I will. States like Pennsylvania, Delaware, you go up north. So these guns are coming in through interstates. They're not being flown in. They're literally cars driving on the I-95 and coming into New York with guns. So we have to create a much better approach on intercepting these guns through the interstates. So that's working with state troopers, that's working with other states' police, having some sort of collaboration and task force. So you have to have a multi-faceted approach here. But I really do, again, believe the root cause is poverty. But in the short term, we have to attack it from all angles.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that question and your response. I do think another big issue that does impact New York City as a whole in general is that of like substance abuse. So what measures have you been working on? Has the New York State Assembly and the Senate been working on to help alleviate that issue?
Oh, substance abuse is another one. I think we have misclassified for a long time, especially in the state of New York. We've classified substance abuse as a criminal, and we've incarcerated many individuals for substance abuse, where I think now we realize that it's a public health issue. Substance abuse can be from mental disorder, it can be from depression, it can be from anxiety, it can be from a boatload of issues, but it's a public health issue and it's not a crime. So we've worked as a government, one, to just reshape our thinking there, right? Because if you address an issue as a crime, you're going to come as an entirely different approach as opposed to a public health issue. So now, instead of incarcerating individuals, we work to bring them resources. We work to increase funding, for substance abuse programs, for programming right in the heart of areas where we know, unfortunately, this is taking place. We're working on things such as needle exchanges. Because if you know people are unfortunately going to be using drugs, you want to at least mitigate and reduce the spread of diseases and anything that will, cause even more harm to that community. There are even talks about, this is a very controversial topic, but safe injection sites where people can be at least monitored, and again, offered clean needles, and then offered some sort of programming where you're not forcing it upon them and giving the option to go into rehabilitation and get them clean. So the government, again, this is another tough issue where you have a lot of opposing views, but I think overall we're shifting into a much more compassionate and understanding viewpoint, and we're really treating this as a public health issue. And I think if we continue to do that, we can really address this. But there are a lot of other ways, right? I mean, you have companies like, sorry, what is it? Is it Purdue? Now I'm forgetting the company, but a big opioid company who pretty much manufactured the opioid crisis as we know it today. And our Attorney General, Letitia James, actually brought them to court and won a massive lawsuit to make them pay for really the harm that they've done to our communities. And that funding is going to go towards these families and these substance abuse programs. So again, there's many issues that we can address in so many different ways, but it all depends on who you choose to be your voice, who you choose to be your elected officials, and who are going to handle this, and from what angle they're going to handle this. Are they going to view substance abuse as a crime, or are they going to be compassionate and say it's a public health crisis?
So I just want to thank you for answering that question in the way that you did, because again, it's a public health issue, not a crime. Other areas have the funding, the money to be able to go into rehab, and our areas don't. So it's kind of like, why criminalize one and not the other? As we kind of come to an end, overall, I would hope that anyone, if you guys do have any questions, drop them in the chat. If you don't, our last question for you, Assembly Member Burgos, is: you are here now, you're an assemblyman. I'm sure this is not where you end. What are your future plans?
Wherever the people of New York decide I should be. I really am honored to be in this position. This is a neighborhood that has shaped who I am. My grandmother lives here. My parents have lived here. So to be able to effectuate change just right here is really an honor. And wherever my voice is needed, and as times change, then I'll lend my voice in my service. But I'm also a believer that we have to always make room for new leadership. That's how I came up. That's how I was able to be in this position, and I want to repay that and pay it forward. So, I don't plan to be an elected official until my days are done. I plan to hopefully groom and work with, the younger people that are coming up in my neighborhood and that they want to see change. And again, to share their experiences and their life experiences in this neighborhood at a government level. And if I can help to do that, that would just be amazing to me. So wherever the people of New York decide.
Wonderful, thank you. I do see we have a hand raised. Yaman, I hope I am saying that correctly. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to speak or say anything.
Hello, my name's Osiyama, and my cohort came in kind of late. So I don't know if you've already answered this question, but I would like to ask, what journey did you take to get to where you are today? Because I know, for politics, they might not be a direct path. Some people come in as lawyers, and some people come in from other angles. So what have you experienced so far, and why did you choose politics?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we answered in some ways, but I'll try to reframe it a bit. So quick recap for me. Like I said, I went to undergrad in Albany, and that's where our state capital is. So I kind of got a firsthand experience of what our state government's role was and how, people in Albany were deciding what was happening in my hometown, the Bronx. And then started to work for the New York City Council, which is a local city government agency. And I just worked for council members, being a staffer. So I handled stuff like legislation, worked on the budget, worked with, nonprofits, you name it. So then from there, I decided to run for office just through my experience working in a political space. But like you said, there's absolutely no, one set path to getting involved in politics or deciding to run for office. You have people that come from a lawyer background. You have people that come from an activist or grassroots organization background. You have people who are teachers. You have people who worked in unions. At the end of the day, our democracy was created so that if people decide that you're my voice, my representative, then you're the representative. It doesn't matter. There's no prerequisite for politics. People often ask me or think that you don't even have to have a degree to be a politician now. I'm not advocating not to go to school, but the point I'm making is that we make we frame this to not have any prerequisite because we don't want to bar anyone from being a representative. If you have the passion, if you have the work ethic and the experience and people believe in you, then you can be a representative of office. Now, sometimes it's, it can be a little insular, so it's difficult to learn the political process, right? To get on the ballot is sometimes climbing a mountain in itself. You have to petition. People have to sign a literal petition in your neighborhood, and they have to be registered voters and say, I want to see you on the ballot. Doesn't mean they even want to vote for you. They just want to see you on the ballot. So once you do that, you get on the ballot, then you campaign, you're going against other people. So it's a long, long process that we can talk all day about, but there certainly is no background. And again, to kind of quickly answer, what got me involved in politics was I didn't come from a political family. I knew nothing of politics, to be quite honest, in high school. I had no idea how politics affected me and my family and our daily lives. I grew up, and it may be a product of, again, growing up in this borough or maybe coming from immigrant family, right? It's like you take what you're given. You assume that the way things are, someone decided and you really can't do much about it. That's just the way it has to be and you got to deal with it. But that's not how life is, and that's not how this city or the state is. So when I learned that, I said, you know what? I want to be involved. I want to have decision-making power because I know we can fix these things. I know there's a lot of room for improvement in the state of New York, right? You think 10 years ago, again, we had stop and frisk. Marijuana was illegal. People were being put in solitary confinement. We had mass incarceration. We still do. But again, these are things that have to be changed. And if no one is making those points, if no one is pushing for them, if you're not pushing for them, then who will? So that's what really inspired me, just seeing the government firsthand. And then I just really ran with it. And then now I just try to speak to others to just get involved in any aspect. Like I said, just at the most minimal, vote. The day before, you look up the candidates, you can find one or two issues you like and just make that decision, but be a part of it. And if you want to go to the major level and you decide you want to run for office, then get fully involved. Learn all the issues, learn where you stand, speak to your neighbors, but just be involved in any way you can.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you so much for answering that and providing that overview. I actually would love to ask you one also final question. This is more on a positive note, but like, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received? And also related to that, what is the last piece of advice that you would like to share and leave with our youth participants today?
I guess maybe not advice, but a phrase that has always stuck with me. And I mean, I use and I think of on a daily basis. It's quite simple, but it really resonated with me. And it's someone once told me, whether you think you can or can't, you're right. So whether you think you can do something, you're absolutely right. But if you think you can't do something, then you're also right. You are the person who decides what you're going to be, what you're going to do. Sometimes we are our own worst enemy. And the first battle is always with yourself, right? So whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. So try to always believe that you can. And it can sound corny and cliche, but I really do believe, this is a battle I have even with myself today, that sometimes we're just battling with our own internal voices, and just remove all those barriers, remove all the negativity. And if you want to see something, if you want to do something, if you want to be something, then just focus on doing it. Just absolutely say, I'm going to go ahead and do everything I have to do to accomplish this. And you remove the distractions, you remove the negative voices, and I promise you, the timing may not be what you like, but you can get it done. You may want to do it, super fast, instantly, but if you continue to persevere, it will get done.
Sorry, I was having troubles unmuting myself.
No worries.
In the chat, we thank you, and in the chat it says, "I love that because it's true." Thank you, Grisnell, for responding. It is 10:07, and as much as we've loved hearing from you, it's coming to an end. I'm sure your day is going to be just as long as everyone else's. We thank you, thank you, thank you. If anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, This goes for the AM cohort as well as the PM cohort. Sorry, we will have this session recorded where you can go back, listen to what the assemblyman has said or hasn't said, and just feel free to send in any of your questions to the email that Mr. Burgos just dropped in the chat. And again, we come from the era of technology. He also dropped his, I'm not sure if that's Instagram, Twitter, for everything.
Yeah, that's what my ad name is for Twitter, for Instagram, for Facebook. So yeah, I mean, if you have a question, concern, if you want help with something, DM me, email me, whatever you'd like. If you just want to follow me to get more involved, feel free. And I'm happy to help anything past this.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody,
you.
for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Burgos, for giving us your time during this busy season for you. And like we just mentioned, he did drop his social media handle in the chat as well as his email address. Please feel free to get involved. If you have any further questions, please email myself or Ms. Lauren Sanchez, and we will forward it to Mr. Burgos' team. Otherwise, wishing everybody a lovely rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks everyone for listening, for your questions, and thank you, Stacy, Liz, and Lauren for hosting this. Look forward to seeing you all in the future. And again, please feel free to reach out to me. I try to be as accessible as I can.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Have a
Super
great month.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye.